Hi everyone. Sorry for the couple minutes delay. Everything's run so smoothly today that we needed at least one glitch, and the good news is the glitch is only like this many minutes long. So if that's our only issue, we're doing well. So welcome to session 10 of the EdCollab Gathering. Make sure while you're watching along that you use hashtag the EdCollab Gathering space hashtag number 10. And that's how you'll be a part of the work that we're doing here together. It is my honor, and I'm excited to introduce to you our two presenters today. So Mary Cappellini, who I have admired from her book and from afar for quite a long time. This is actually the first time I got to talk in person with her, and I'm already excited. I should add before I introduce her that Mary last night was at a benefit where she helped to raise, I think she said like $60,000 for a Save Our Youth and After School mentoring program. So congratulations to you, Mary. We also are sending you positive energy to help you stay awake. So Mary, in addition to all the wonderful things she does, she also gives her evenings to support important causes. So Mary Cappellini is a researcher, a consultant, she's an author, she's an expert, and has spent decades researching English language learners and ways that we can support them. A book that I have dog-eared and marked up, and especially there's a few sections in particular I use all the time, is about to celebrate its 10th year anniversary, and that's Balancing Reading and Language Learning. And inside of this incredible book, Mary, in I think some of the clearest ways I've read, helps you think about how the reading work that you do can be really supportive of your English language learners. There's one page in particular I love that she has like the stages of language acquisition and helps you think about how you can use that to support your reading work. So I am so thrilled and honored to have Mary here. I'm also excited to introduce to all of you, or reintroduce to many of you, my dear friend Emily DeLito. Emily and I worked together at the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project for many, many years. We even traveled the world together, consulting in Jordan for quite some time, as well as other places too. Emily is a consultant. She works around the world with schools and districts supporting English language learners and literacy in general. You can find her at the blog that she co-blogs called Language is Living, and there they share lots of ideas about supporting English language learners, and love to be connected with you. You can also find Emily at her blog if you'd like to continue to connect with her and meet more together. So I am really excited for today's session. So here we go. So I'll turn it over to both of you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be able to be here and to finally meet you, Chris, and to be with my dear friend Emily, who is on the East Coast, and I'm in California, so different time zones, and there's people I understand around the world that are in as well from different time zones. Shout out to those in South America that can't get home, like my husband, because of flights with the giant volcano that erupted in Chile. And I know there's people also in the Middle East that's nighttime for them, so different time zones, but it's a great day to bring everyone together. So thanks for having me, Chris. And Emily, I don't know if you wanted to say hello as well before I went into the slide.
Yeah, well, I'm on the complete other sort of ocean coast from Mary. I'm down in Miami, and I'm excited to sort of be connecting virtually with so many colleagues from around the world, so it's fun to be here with you.
Great. Well, I think we'll just get started then. We're actually right now looking at celebrate and support English language learners within our communities, using data to grow language and literacy in small groups. And you can see from the first slide that the joy that you see on kids' faces is what we're really shooting for, that we are encouraging our ELLs to be excited about learning and about their experiences as they're growing as a reader and a learner. Emily had some thoughts too before we get started, a little bit about, you know, just the kids that you might know in your classrooms.
Yeah, so today we're talking together about how do we use data effectively with this eye toward language and literacy, and something that Mary and I both know and really respect from being in so many classrooms and school communities is this idea that everyone probably tuning in is coming with a different background or a different idea. Like maybe you're tuning in today because you've never had an English language learner in your classroom before, and this year you have a new student, or maybe there's a new population coming into your neighborhood and a growing population of a particular language that you don't know. Possibly you have 16 different languages out of 27 kids in your in your class, and everyone sort of is on a spectrum of language learning. And so what we thought we could do just for you to kind of feel like you could have a connection to both Mary and I is to be able to take a moment to tweet or across our time and just take a minute to think, who are you tuning in for today? Is there a particular learner or a particular child who has stuck with you in your mind as someone who you're really curious about, someone who you're hoping that you'll have a little nugget of something to try next week when you head back to your classrooms or your school communities? To us, it's really important to think about that. And as Mary takes us through what are some different ways of exploring data and actually having useful data that's not 8 months old and gives us a one-word idea of who that learner is, but how do we actually, in a meaningful way, take that information and then transfer it to differentiate? And Mary's going to sort of explore a bit around shared reading and guided reading through that, and then I'm going to end talking a little bit around read aloud with small groups and different ways of maximizing that. So as you're thinking about who that ELL population is, feel free to tweet it. Mary is now on Twitter for all of you ready to follow her.
Finally. Emily told me I have to join.
Mary_Cappellini. So please let us know who those students are, who those populations are, and we're happy to modify some of our conversations based on that information. Mary?
Well, thanks, Emily. And it's just it's great to be able to talk with her in person. I only usually get to see her when I go to Columbia and meet her over there. So it's nice to be here back. And so the next slide you're going to see is jumping right into a classroom. And so if we take a look at this picture, and we see that there is just a wide range of children that we have in our classrooms. So this is a classroom full of kids from all over the world, and Myra is the little girl right there in the middle in the orange. And I think when you think about maybe one person, she's one person that stuck out when I used to go visit in this friend's classroom. And we have kids from in here that were from Russia, from Ukraine, from Dominican Republic, from Vietnam. Myra was from Mexico. And when we think about our large variety of English language learners that sit in our classrooms, we want to think about ways to celebrate them, to celebrate their diversity, and to support each and every one of them. But sometimes we have to look at that group that's sitting in front of us in a whole group setting and say, you know, are they all understanding what I am presenting? Are they all understanding the conversation? How much are they grasping? So that gets then to supporting them. How do we really support them? And I think it's important for us to really think about how can we develop not just their reading or their literacy skills, but also their language, and how can we meet their individual needs. And that's really, really what we want to look at. So today when we think about knowing each English language learner, if you have 34 kids in your class, as some giant classrooms have, or you have 20, or you have 22, you still have to think about individual kids. And so what does each of these kids need? So this child, for example, or whether it was Myra, you know, what do I know about her language level? Is she a beginning speaker? Is she been speaking in English for many years? Is she more an advanced speaker? Or is she in the intermediate level? What do I know about her reading level? Many of you are pretty expert at taking their reading levels, either their DRAs or if you're doing any records. You might know their individual reading levels, but you also know the strategies that they use effectively. You know, what does Myra do really well? Does she gather all the information possible? Does she look at the pictures? Does she think about the background knowledge? Does she use her semantics as well as her syntax to help her? Or does she get stuck on every individual letter and word? So we need to think about what strategies do they use well and how we can help them with that. And the next piece that I think is really critical when we're working with English language learners is what language patterns does she use effectively? You know, what are her interests? And what does she like to read? And what are her goals? So if we can match, for example, some of the books that she likes to read with books that also support language patterns at her individual English language proficiency level, we will be doing a great job. But we also need to think about the goals that she might have, or the goals that we might have for her in her reading. So that's where I get to this developmental checklist. There are a lot of different developmental checklists. These come from my book, but you can use checklists from a variety of sources, and it's just important to think about, this isn't the assessment tool per se, this is your checklist where once a month you go back into your data and you look down and say, in my reading strategies, what is this child doing really well? Is the child able to use their background knowledge? Is the child reading deeper? Is the child using their semantic cues? Are they using their graphophonic cues? Are they rechecking? What are the things that they do well? So this is a list for the strategies, and I think it's important, as you see on the left, it says by Eddie, there's reading strategies and language patterns for an emergent reader, and then which can be very different also for the early to fluent strategies to sustain meaning for an earlier fluent reader, which also has a more deeper checklist that I don't have here that you could also find in my book. But this is a piece I think that Chris likes and that Emily likes and a lot of people use effectively.
29.
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
It's page 29. There was a running joke around amongst a lot of my colleagues and friends that I was obsessed with page 29 in Mary's book.
Okay. Well, these are some of the things that come from that. And from the book at the time, I say old at the top, California State Standards. These are based on developmental standards, language proficiency levels. And you'll see that there's new standards that are always changing as far as more how we label them. So you have now, I have in green the labels for New York, which are entering, emerging, transitioning, expanding, and commanding. For the WIDA standards, which has 35 states now involved, they also use entering and emerging, but they use developing and expanding and bridging. But regardless of what you call them, these are language patterns that kids use as they're developing language. Whether they're a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 20-year-old, they're going through developmental stages. I work primarily with K through 6 students, but as Chris mentioned, with this great nonprofit that I work at in the after-school programs, they're for teenagers, and we have a lot of kids that are 16, 17 that are coming into our country needing some more support with English language development, and they come and we help them after school. And it doesn't matter whether they're 16 or they're 5, they still go through the same challenges and changes and patterns as they're progressing as language learners. So if you think about, she's going to school, the contractions, is she speaking a habitual present, which she goes to her friend's house every day, not just once. He played soccer yesterday. What are the things that they use at the expanding or early advanced stages? I like the play, however, I didn't like the main character. This will help you then to track your kids' progress. And when you know those pieces, then you look at the developmental checklist, and once a month, it says 7, for example, 14 at the top, and then for the students that maybe work in a year-round school or the teachers that work at a year-round school, then in August and in September, or if you have the month off in November and December, once a month to go in and see how are they progressing. And what you'll notice is that some kids are pretty secure, even Miriam here is secure with using irregular past tense at the early advanced stage, but yet she still is developing some things at the intermediate stage. So it's a fluid chart, but it's important for us to really think about long-term data, how we help them with their goals of language and goal setting, and really more importantly is to look at their progress. Emily has been working with me on a new study guide for my book, and as you'll see in this checklist, it has the new developmental stages. At the top, you'll see it says WIDA. We have them also for the new ones for California, the new ones for Texas, and the new ones for New York. Those are the states that have the largest population of English language learners. And of course, WIDA affects 35 states, so we've covered most of them. But what you'll see here, this one isn't filled out because you'll have to go to stenhouse.com and when the new study guide pops up, but you'll have some checklists there that's available for you to look at how you can keep progress for our kids across the year. And that's really important because one of the things that we see happening often is that principals and districts are tracking their reading development. And sometimes they say, why is this child plateaued? Why isn't this child progressing any? Why is he having so many difficulties when we're doing running records? And often it's just a language pattern issue, that they are not having enough progress in their stages of language development. So this is a separate checklist from your reading checklist, and this needs to go along with every English language learner. They need a checklist for reading as well as a checklist for writing, of course, as well, and as for language. So one of the things that I think you need to think about as well is, as I try to see if I can get my face back on, I have to go back to the screen share and move that. It's a little tricky. Let's see if I can find that. I'm sorry.
The joy.
Oh, there, my face is back on. I'm sorry. Okay. So one of the things I think to then look at is the next stage is, you know, besides knowing our students, what else can we do? So what I'm going to mention now is some other things that I think most of you are probably doing in your classrooms to actually make sure that there is opportunity to, you know, develop language within a theme or unit of study, or to read to, with, and by our kids. And I'll show that slide in just a second. But it's critical, Ren, to think about, you know, are we charting and graphic organizing? Are we doing individual writing and language study with our students? And these are some of the things I think that are important to make sure that we have that availability. So I'm sorry, it's right here. To make sure that we're doing all of these things in our classrooms. And it's critical that we also do sharing in small groups, whole groups, and one-on-one. Emily's going to share a little later about this reading to kids, also in small groups. Most of us think of read alouds as a whole group. I'm going to talk next about shared reading with the kids, and also how to pick books for guided reading where they're reading by themselves. But there's a piece here that we don't have time to discuss today. I think really needs to have, you know, it needs to be happening in your classrooms. You should walk into your room and have a lot of visuals going on. The technology is fabulous with our smart boards, our connections to the internet. But once we turn off our machines and turn off our computer that is connected to the wall that all the kids can see, all of a sudden, what happens? Where is the environmental print that we have? So it's important that we still make sure that we have that there. So let's see if we can also think about this piece of every child is important. And one of the things then to make sure that we can access is this availability then of thinking about, do we know each of our kids? And when we're doing a shared reading lesson, or when we're doing a guided reading lesson, are we expecting different outcomes from every single ELL student? And that's really important, because you might say, I only have 3 kids that are ELLs. Well, there's still 3 kids in your room that you're responsible for. So what are you going to be expecting from them that's different from your fluent speakers or your English-only kids? So what I think is critical then is for you to think about is how we can make sure that we are expecting output from each of our kids. So when we're expecting that output, we want to make sure that, in this example, when we're doing a discussion after we've done a shared reading on a big bringing water to people, which was part of a guided reading and shared reading and series called Readings by Rigby, what we're looking at is comparing 3 watering systems, California, Bali, and Machu Picchu. And in the discussion and some of the charting that goes on, and some of this some kids were writing down, so there's not a lot of complete sentences, but some of their quick thoughts on the differences between the 3 systems of bringing water to people. A beginning speaker would need all 3. A beginning speaker would just say, all 3. Great, that's right, all. They all move water. That's what they need. An intermediate speaker might say, they all need water. All have systems to bring water. An aqueduct takes water to the south. Good, okay, that's a complete sentence. That's what that middle level is doing. They use pumps in California, but not in Bali. Machu Picchu and California have canals to move water. And then the advanced speaker is all 3 systems use technology to move water wherever it's needed. However, gravity is used in Machu Picchu and Bali, whereas in California, use pumps to get over the Tehachapi Mountains in Southern California to bring water from the north down to the south. So it's important for us to really think about ways that we can not only know the kids, but expect outcomes from them. And then we also need to be able to think about ways to also assess them. So after a shared experience, what can we do to actually make sure that we are taking notes on the kids? So you want to make sure that you can put down what every child was able to do in that shared reading experience. So for an example, you could use this slide, this checklist. It's a developmental observation form, really. What did I learn about them? So you could list all your early intermediate speakers, your intermediate speakers, your early advanced, and your advanced speakers. And what did you learn during that session? Now, it's really tricky if you have 30 kids in a shared reading group to be able to get to all of the kids. So I try to focus on 1 or 2 kids at each developmental level each day. I do shared reading every day, so each day I would be able to do that. So let's think then about ways to acknowledge that and to make an assessment. So yeah, Emily, do you have something you want to add?
Well, no, I was just going to say that I think for a lot of teachers that I've worked with over the years in leadership groups and in schools that I've worked in have really found your charts and guide sheets really helpful in having a word to put to the language that they're showing. Like, I think as a teacher of ELLs, like, that's something that I think is that kind of hidden idea of what exactly is it. So being able to look at writing, listening to their oral speech, like really paying attention to all those different areas and then writing it down. I think that those guide sheets and having a clear spot to collect them, and you and I have talked over time about how important it is to go back and reuse. And something I learned from you right from the beginning was that idea of how do you go back to the exact same sheet and have conversation with colleagues about those students. So just like you're saying, focus on just 1 or 2 learners. I think that that's something for us to ponder, is how do you actually hold on to that beautiful data and let it inform your instruction.
Yeah, and I think you bring that up because one of the things that happens often is teachers forget. And I'm getting echo. Echo as well.
A little bit.
Okay, maybe
it's not bad.
Change that.
So I'm wondering if you have the stream open on another device. Like, do you have Google Chat open on another device? Or in another?
No, I don't know. We'll just keep going. I can't even hear you. I'm so sorry, Chris. But what I wanted to say is that Emily and I have talked about this idea of making sure we can get to ideas written down from the teachers on their assessment on each individual kid. So the echo is kind of bothering me. I'm so sorry that everyone else cannot hear it. Are you okay, Emily?
It's not bad, Mary.
Okay. All right, so let's get back to then this idea of thinking about individual kids. And when we are going to form a small group, we take the information that we have learned from shared reading, from reading aloud, looking at our notes, and saying, this is what I learned about my in language as well as in speech. And then how do we think about that when we're going to work in a small group? So what do we know about our ELL ability to use the 3 cueing system? Many of you are very familiar with MS&E when we do running records. So if we think about it in the context of semantic cues, syntactic cues, and graphophonic cues, what do we know then about the ELL's ability to be able to use those cues to help them? Probably some of the issues that we have when we're actually working on thinking about choosing books with kids and helping them in the context of their picking books for guided reading. One of the things we need to really think about is if the child does not have the ability to use the semantic cues because they don't have the background knowledge or they don't understand what the pictures represent, or if the child does not have the ability to use the language patterns that are in the text to help them because the patterns might be above his ability level, then the child can't use that natural syntactic cues to help him or his S. Maybe the child, doesn't know the difference between certain letters because of the difference between his language and English language. But one of the things we need to think about, especially for the semantic cues and the syntactic cues, is instead of looking at a book that is easier, maybe we want to look at a book that is at the same developmental level, but is one that is at the child's language pattern level. So let me show you what that means as two examples. So if we think about the syntactic cues, if the child is not able to actually speak in the past tense, he might have difficult with certain books in the past tense. This book happens to be in the present tense. Its interest level and language level is important when choosing books for ELLs. And so one of the things to think about is not only that does the child like soccer, but if the child is only speaking to the present tense, will this child be able to do it because of his language ability? We don't want the child's language level to impede his ability to continue to read. So I kicked the ball. Obviously, it is in the present tense, so it's pretty simple. This is an emergent book. The next book that I have is not, oops, let me go back, sorry. I clicked, it wasn't moving. Here we go. So this one, I had a frog, it jumped out of its bowl. I had a mouse, it ran back to its hole. So not only is it in the past tense, but it's in the irregular past tense, from have to had, from run to ran. And so even though this is also an emergent book, this will be very challenging for a child that is not at the intermediate or early advanced stages. So I think this is a really important thing to acknowledge and to think about. And I know, Emily, you've made some comments about this before as well, to have actually think about kids and teachers to look at the developmental levels of their language when they're choosing books. Do you have a short comment on that, just to see your pretty face?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I think that a lot of teachers have found helpful, especially if you're in a reading workshop and you might have your students shop for books once a week, that it's a really smart idea to think of a couple of things. And Mary kind of rocked my world with a few of my colleagues quite a few years ago when she talked about how simple it was to just merely look at those 8, E-level texts that a reader might have in their baggie and think about those 2 things she's mentioning. Number 1, what is the content? Like, are there, 3 books on chickens, or that take place at home, or, that idea of what the content is, and then that second idea of taking a quick look at what the language is. How is the language presented? Those are little things that we often don't do, that we don't take that quick second. And one thing that I think can get very overwhelming, and kind of looking quickly at the tweets that some of you are thinking about, having an entire classroom full of English language learners, that can feel really overwhelming. And I want you to remember what Mary said about choose just a couple at first to start with, right? Maybe you choose 2 language learners that have been on your radar for some reason. Maybe they haven't been moving as much as you would have hoped, or maybe they were extremely oral when they came in as first graders in the start of the year, but then quickly weren't giving off so much. But start small and start to look at those baggies, or look at the words that they're seeing in their books, and then that's an important thing. And what a lot of my teachers did when we worked on this after I was in a session with Mary, is we started to look and cross-reference their guide sheets, right? So we pulled out that data again, the exact same pages, and really used it as this kind of scaffold for ourselves around what does it mean with a copy of page 29 out. How do we really grow our thinking around this language? And I think that's the important part, Mary, is to just take time to just start out with maybe 2 or 3 learners that you begin to do it easy on the day they shop for books, and take a look for what they have. Do they have 8 different J books, or do they actually have 6 Henry and Mudge books, which might be quite helpful, because then you might be able to first say, content-wise, I know these are the same, then take a look at the language. And if the language matches, it's a great decision. If it's not, if they're not quite at that level of the language patterns that are presenting in that series, then it might be a good thing the next day to have a conference about that.
Well, that's great. One of the things that I noticed when I traveled around the country as well is that teachers often say that the benchmark books that they're using for assessment, the ELL kids are having trouble with because they can't pass that one book's assessment, because usually it's their language level is getting in the way. So I tell them, pick another book at the same level and try that book out as well. So what I want to show you now is just this idea of once you are using your text as this opportunity to take some running records, is what do you learn about the child as a language learner and as a reader. So let's take a look at this page right here. It says, yesterday we caught some frogs, we brought them home, but they wouldn't stay in the bucket. This actually is from Dad's bath time. It's pretty funny, but Dad loves to take a bath every day, and these kids were out chasing frogs, and of course, the funny book as it goes, they pick up the frogs, and where do you think they take it? They take it to Dad's bath. Put him in the bathtub before he goes to take a bath. So it's a very humorous, really cute little book, but one of the things I wanted to show you is the only page that has past tense is this one, because they're setting up the scene to actually move the book forward. So look below, and this is what the ELL's reading of the text is, and I want us to just think about it. Think about one of the kids in your classrooms. Would these be the same types of miscues that they might make? And if so, what would you do about it? And I think it's really important for us to really think about that. This is how a child would read this. Yes, yesterday we catched some frogs. We bring these home, but they would not stay on the ground, on the book, on the pocket. Well, if you were all in front of me live, I could see all your nice faces. I might ask you what you're thinking, and unfortunately we don't have that lovely opportunity to see everyone and to have you interact so closely. But I want you to think about this first sentence, yesterday we catch some frogs. Does the child know and understand the meaning? Of course. Does the child know the regular past tense for catch? No. So his language level is not able to use this early advanced stage of language yet. We bring these home instead of we brought. Again, those verbs really made it difficult. The child did some great things. He substituted, and then he self-corrected. And the interesting thing that I thought was really cool is when you look at stay in the bucket, the child sees that, knows it's not a book, knows it's not a pocket, but he's looking using all of his cueing systems he can to try to figure that out. He knows it's not ground, but that made more sense. You know, they wouldn't stay on the ground. They're going all around, you know. But then he looks at the word, and he sees all those letters in the word, and he recognizes, well, maybe it's book, because there's a B and a K. But then he goes, well, that doesn't work either. That doesn't make sense. And then he sees the little boy leaning over. Well, there's also C-K-E-T, and I see a pocket on the back of his pants as well, so maybe he puts in pocket. Well, guess what? Maybe the child knows it as a pail. Maybe the child doesn't know the word either the pail or the bucket, and if we just gave them the word, we could move on. So I think that's important for you to focus on and to think about. Here's another example. This came from my book, Whale Watching, that I wrote. It's a nonfiction text. This is for fluent readers. So these are kids that are bridging or expanding and moving on. And when you think about this in this context, again, on the right, I'm going to read on the right how the ELL reads it. You can look on the left side of what the actual text is. And so the text on the left says, this is how the child would read it. My dad say to look for water, spray up too. Well, let me just back up. They're going whale watching. The children are, if you've ever been whale watching, sometimes it takes a while to find that whale. So this is on page 9. We've gone through the whole process of getting out to the ocean. They're out there. They're looking for the whale. They're looking out into the sea. And I'm living right here on the ocean. I have a lot of opportunity to go whale watching. And so I know what it's like. This child is looking. So this is what he says. Again, I'm sorry. I'll go back. So my dad say to look for water, spray up to. That will tell us that a whale is breathed there. When whales are close to the surface and breathe out, they blow air and water from the bowl, blow We are keeping watch. Everyone wants to be the first to see a gray whale. Well, overall, the child did some great things, and the child really understands what's going on. But of course, there are some errors there that an English language learner would make. That doesn't mean that the child doesn't understand the text. What this does do is it gives you opportunity then to say, what did I learn about the child as a reader? What did I learn about the child as a language learner? So from there, we move forward, and I just want to go through these next slides kind of quickly so that we can make sure that we have time to go into read aloud as well. So from filling out the checklist, from thinking about what we know about the students, and from thinking about the ways that we can support them, we would then go back into the opportunity to then to choose a text. And in that context, then I would choose something that would match that child's reading ability. It's also important to make that connection also to writing and to allow you to then think about ways to take patterns from the text and patterns from the book that we choose and that we then use to help develop their language and to develop their patterns. So here's some pattern. You know, look at this book. Why are the oceans polluted? Well, people put waste in the oceans. Of course they do. And it gives them all the information of the types of waste. Rivers and drains carry chemicals and so forth. Waste from factories is sometimes put in. When waste gets in the ocean, it can damage and so forth. But down below, it also has a question. What can people do? And it says right away what they can do. So we can use this text for a variety of purposes to help with language mini lessons as well. We often, as reading teachers, are really good at choosing lessons for reading strategies, and we're thinking about how to share and compare and contrast. We're thinking about questions and cause and effect. But we also need to think about, for English language learners to join into that conversation, to have good writing papers and responses to this. They need to be able to defend their opinions. They need to be able to write responses effectively. They need to be able to use the language appropriately to show that cause and effect, to describe the problem and solution, to help them summarize, and so forth. So one of the things then that I would hope that you would do is to, when you choose a book like Saving the Oceans, that you think about how you could focus on certain things that that book has in store for you, like questions and answers, and like declarative sentences and commands, like showing cause and effect. If people do this, then they pollute the oceans. If people take this, then they can damage. If the wildlife is damaged, it can take years to develop and to refurbish in that ocean. So then again, you have to go back and almost think about very specific things that you can chart out for the kids. Infinitives to take, helps to take, declarative sentences, can take, can damage, can end up. Some of these things we take for granted that our kids know. But when they go to write, you see the language structures that they are missing. And it is in the writing time that you really notice where some of their gaps are. Then you can go back to those checklists and to try to figure that out and say, what can I do to help them? So again, simple questions helps them. Problems and solutions, declarative sentence, we can work together, we can stop polluting the waste, we can make sure we protect the ocean, protect the animals. So I want you to think about then these teachable moments and teachable language extensions from the text based on what their ELLs need. I'm a scribbler. I like to write notes all over, and so what you see here is some notes when I pick up a book and say, what language patterns can I choose and teach from this text? Oh my gosh, look at all these language patterns. To be, can, garbage can. If people did this, then if people did that, if they did this. Solutions, declaratives, and then I typed it out for you so you can read it a little bit better on my side, taking those notes for the kids and themselves, for you to then be able to teach more effectively. What I like to do is just to think about kind of in closing up my section is just this opportunity then to say, what do I know about the reader and the language learner? How can I celebrate them, and how can I plan for those instructions? I think that's the key, you know, and that's what Emily and I have been always talking about, is helping teachers look at individual kids and making it easier for them to do that. So Emily, you can join in if you have any comments on what I had, or to think about ways to move forward with the read aloud.
Well, I think what you were saying about really knowing all those individual students is so important for what I'm about to chat about. And one phrase that you also just said that really stuck out to me is that phrase of using a text for a variety of purposes and reasons. And, you know, something that Kylene Beers said at a presentation we were giving together quite a few years ago is she said, you know, so often, starting in 3rd grade in particular, but so often in all grade levels, every day is a new page. It's a new page in every subject area, a new page in a book, versus what is the language that we pick up? It's the language that we hear again and again. So I think what you're saying, Mary, of using a text for a variety of reasons is super helpful. And I want to start by thinking with this first slide around maximizing time to build language. Sorry, go back to the slide. You were good. Uh-oh, I can't hear you either. Okay, so kind of an old favorite tome that has nothing to do with language learners, but more about, or as its own entity, but just about education in general, is Jim Trelease's book, The Read Aloud Handbook. If you haven't picked it up in a while or in a couple of decades, it's a great one to revisit. And he says in that text that grammar is more caught than taught, and the way you catch it is the same way you catch the flu. You're exposed to it. By hearing the language spoken correctly, you begin to imitate the pattern both in what you say and in what you write. And we want to be able to think about maximizing the time to truly build language across the day, thinking about those whole class and small group experiences. We've been thinking, you know, just as a society in a lot of ways, there have been a lot of articles out there around reading aloud to older children, to younger children, and really maximizing what can happen in that time is huge. On the next slide, we're going to think just really fast together about how we can do instructional read-alouds with an eye toward L's. Something to really ponder and look at your daily schedule around, even in middle school, is this idea that learners need to be read to at least 20 to 30 minutes, multiple times when possible, even in content area. That idea of hearing how Mary, go back for a second.
I'm sorry.
Holding on to where that is, holding on to how those points of entry and hearing things gives language a voice. So sort of carrying that idea that we're going to catch grammar and we're going to catch concepts, but really clarifying that idea of how do we incorporate a read aloud into our day. Using accountable talk with partnerships or triads, whole group conversation at least 3 to 4 times a week also helps to build that idea of you heard the language, now it's time for you to practice language. And we certainly have scaffolds for L's that we can include in that. Mary's got some lovely ones in her book, but we're certainly going to talk very quickly about a couple of others. Also choose texts that are engaging and that support the work in reading and writing. I went to high school partially in Spain, and one thing that a lot of my friends when I was 16 wanted were for me to translate a Pearl Jam song, that it was so much about the language that they were hearing and the songs that were on repeat that they wanted to hold on to. And we can do that in our classrooms, right? We can really think, what are the texts that they want to hear again and again, even if it's bunny cakes, similar to what Jim Trelease talks about, especially for young children, right? That the book you're ready to chuck out the window. Matt and Kathy talked about that earlier today. When you're ready to just be done with the text, it probably means they're capturing a lot of language that they will imitate from that. And last but not least, when you're thinking about instructional read-alouds, you really want to plan out ahead of time. This isn't the time to just experience for the first time a book. It's really carefully choosing that book for a reason, which you know, going back to what Mary laid out already, that idea of going back to your guide sheets, going back to that data of what you know that your learners need and being able to harness that, which is going to carry us into this idea on the next slide around how do we actually read aloud to students in small group. Something to think about, and I might even push your mind to say that this could happen during writing workshop or social studies even if you're have those elements to your day. The idea that you can use small group work to expose to texts, right, to really be able to pull that together. So I'm just going to go quickly through some of these ideas. So why would you do this? Why would you pull a group of 2 learners or 6 learners and do a quick read aloud with them? Well, It might be to create a shared experience, right? To be moved, to savor language and create a love of words, possibly to build a common history, to share experiences in culture, sometimes deepen empathy or allow students to be shown in books, to see themselves on the page. Colleen Cruz talks a lot about that, about wanting to see yourself, see a character or see a location, even in an informational book or an activity that you know really well. There's a lot to be said for that. And to think about what are the texts that you want to return to multiple times, just like Mary was saying about using a text for multiple reasons. You also want to be able to do it to model the sound of strong reading. How do you bring phrasing and fluency, expression, and voice into that? The idea that the more that you're hearing language, the more that they're more likely to actually imitate that language. And the last just bullet is about modeling language and providing opportunities for that language acquisition, right? In our lives, the majority of the language that we use is language that we've acquired. It's not language that we've learned in isolation. When Chris and I were together in Jordan, there were certain phrases in Arabic that we learned very quickly. Phrases like katir siyara, our driver used to say a lot, lots of cars. So these are words that we pick up because we hear them again and again and again. It's not necessarily sitting with a book and learning them. So being cautious that read aloud is where language acquisition can happen in a beautiful space. On the next slide, there are just a couple of others that I'm going to go through fairly quickly. That we might model reading habits that support independence. We might develop stamina to listen to and read books, strengthen skills to talk back to and think deeper about their own texts, right? The books that they might have in their baggie or that they're reading independently. We also want to learn to think deeply about texts, to communicate our own thoughts in talk and in writing. Using language prompts to help to form those is super powerful. Mary just talked about that quickly around language patterns, and really maximizing that is a wonderful way of using that data too. And last but not least, just the penultimate is to pre-expose ELs to a text that will be read to the entire class, right? A lot of us with ESL backgrounds know that that's a beautiful help, right, that pre-exposure to build background knowledge, but it's often difficult to do, but that's a great idea. It's also a lovely idea if you have ESL teachers that are supporting that maybe they could pre-expose to a read-aloud that's going to be a class read-aloud so that there's some parallel work happening. And last but not least, providing multiple exposures to language patterns and vocabulary, as well as reading skills that ELs are ready to strengthen based on the data. The more that they try it, the more that they hold on to. I'm going to go fairly quickly through the next couple. Couple quick modifications. Number one, make read-alouds visible. Mary, can you switch back? And then Krista, can you switch to me for a fast second? So one thing that I thought this would be easier to see, it was when I practiced it, is you might do something like this, like have a pocket chart where you're laying out the characters that you might meet in the text. These all go back to Apartment 3 by Ezra Jack Keats. So the idea is that you can actually visually help them to connect into maybe some words that they're going to see, possibly some phrases like I think blank is blank because, and maybe have a word bank. So having them be visual and have a visual element could be really lovely. Mary, let's go back really fast and then we'll wind it up. You might also pre-teach a vocabulary word, one or two, that could help, that are really integral to the text. Not just the most difficult ones, but the ones that make a difference within that text, that if they don't know, or it comes up again and again, that they're really going to lose meaning. That can be helpful. And last but not least is just incorporating synonyms on the run. I learned this from Diane August when she and Catherine Snow wrote their book on vocabulary development, around how we stop too often, right? When there's a word when we're reading aloud, we just will stop and teach the word in the moment, but it's really not very effective. So something that they taught us to do was that you could do a synonym on the run where you just keep the text flowing. So in Apartment 3 on the very first page it says, the rain fell steadily, it beat against the windows. And when I know that the word steadily most first graders or fourth graders won't use or have in their vernacular. So what I'll read when I read this text is, the rain fell steadily, it did not stop. It beat against the windows, softening the sounds of the city, right? So I'll kind of put the definition on the run straight in there. So it's not stopping to say, readers, the word steadily means, right, and coaching into that. On the next slide, I'm just going to walk really fast, Mary, through these next ones. This is just a quick way of collecting thoughts. You might color code where, like Mary said, skills using going back to multiple times. Like you could actually 4 times across a read aloud. This is just a picture book in a 5th grade class where they went back multiple times to the same skill, but then visually they were then able to talk off of it. Or the next slide, which is Anthony's 3rd grade class. Mary?
Yeah, I'm trying.
It won't go. Okay. Where he, at the end of different read-alouds, would... he would just have them talk in partnerships, and then they could just hold on to different thoughts. The next slide, which you're happy to go back and check out later if you want to look at it, in Nellie's 4th grade class, she set up some prompts and then had learners in her class actually act out what those prompts meant, and then they were used not just in a character reading unit of study, but across the year. So that's something for us to think about, is just how do we really weave all these different parts together. So kind of to pull that idea of knowing your data, holding on to the readers you're able, and language learners you're able to hold on to, and then grow that in meaningful ways. I'll go back to Mary for a quick second to kind of wrap up and sort of share a quick last thought.
Well, it's just such a pleasure to be here and to think about having the opportunity to hear from people about really knowing our English language learners, celebrating them and supporting them, and I think it's hopefully an important opportunity for all of us. Thank you so much.
Okay, everybody, I want to say thank you so much for participating with us today. We have another event coming up in just a few minutes that you'll be able to also watch. We would like you to, when you can, make a move over to Mike Sal, music producer and engineer, will share ways that we can combine writing, technology, and music to inspire our students. So yeah, find your way over to that session. It will be starting in about 4 minutes.
Can't wait. Thank you so much. Thanks, Emily.
Okay.